So what I'm showing you today are the brushes that I have been using recently to paint my miniatures. And if you're a serious miniatures painter, I suspect you're fairly shocked with what I'm showing. Now I should emphasize that the toothbrush is not used for, I'm not base coating or trying to dot eyes with the toothbrush. The toothbrush is used for cleaning paint off miniatures, and it's also used as a flicking tool for doing things like star fields or certain types of camouflage or certain weathering effects. Okay, so the paintbrush I'll put to one side. I am using it, but it's fine. These others are all old. The newest one is this one, which is a Reaper dry brush, which I won in a competition. It was doing quite well as a dry brush. I've recently been using it for stippling, which means that the tip has started to lose coherency, but it's a good stippling brush. It's an okay detail dry brush. This one I use for mostly large-scale dry brushing, terrain, objectives, tanks, that kind of stuff. It's an old bristle oil brush which I inherited from my mother-in-law. Those two are fine. These three have been through the wars. This one is ancient. It's an ancient Citadel brush, I think. It's been a really good brush. As you can see, the tip is a real mess. But as a base coating brush for large areas, it's been fine, actually. And the flow of paint is really good, even though I let the tip really fall apart. These others I use interchangeably as detail brushes, depending on how fastidious I'm being about the detail. And I'll be honest, I have not looked after them well, and I think it's time to change up. Basically, is what I'm saying. It is time to see what else is out there. So let's put these aside and see what my alternatives might be. So this is what I'm looking at today to pretty much replace my brushes. This is the Army Painter Wargames Mega Brush set that I bought from my local friendly Wargames store, which is Incom Gaming in Cheltenham. And we're going to have a look inside and see what we get. The set itself, with a small discount from Incom, was £37. And before we sort of take it apart, let's have a look at the box, see what's promised. The promise on the box is we've got insane detail, detail and psycho, and we're going to look at how those three brushes distinguish themselves. There's also a character brush, a regiment brush, a vehicle brush, a monster brush, and small and large dry brushes. And if you were to buy all of those 9 brushes, they would be how much this box costs. But Army Painter also throws in this masterclass Kolinsky brush, and we're going to see whether that looks like it is a deal worth taking. So let's start off. We get a Wargames Army painting guide. Now I have had a look through this before, and it's actually quite a decent piece of literature. It has a lot of handy advice and recommendations and guides. I've been painting miniatures for the best part of 35 years, and I think there is probably something in here for me to learn, even if it's just about what Army Painter sells and offers. There's very little in here I haven't tried. I've used their quick shade paints. I've used the dip, as it's called. There's stuff here about how to use it, but I still think there is something that could be learned from here. This is actually quite a solid piece of wargaming advice for anybody just starting out in the hobby. Inevitably, by anything, you get some marketing bump. This is a little catalogue of their hobby products. You can see that on their website. And then we get to the meat. Little plastic vacuum-formed blister pack, resealable. Oops. And we get the brushes and some more marketing, which is their war paints range. There's some advice on the war paints range about how to use the brushes, and there is of course a little tag if you've got anything missing from Army Painter. Now, before we go on to the brushes, I just wanted to talk about this box, because I love this box. I think this box is pretty much perfect for a homemade wet palette. It's quite a shallow box, plastic, resealable, and I'm going to have a go at turning this into a homemade wet palette. We're not going to do that today. I will come back and have a look at this another time, and you guys can see how to make a homemade wet palette using the contents of the Army Painter Mega Brush set. Okay? Later on. Now, let's look at the brushes. Make sure they're all there, I guess, shouldn't I, really? Be embarrassing for Army Painter if they're only missing. Oh, sellotape. Sellotape. There we go. Okay, so let's get these in some semblance of order. Now, I'm going to kind of assume that detail, insane detail, and psycho all kind of go together. Oh, this one's lost its cap. Does anybody see where the cap went? There it is. There it is. Didn't lose its cap. That is detail, insane detail, and character, regiment. Oh, psycho. There we go. Lovely. I love that psycho, honestly. What do they think of us? Small dry brush, vehicle, large dry brush, and monster. Okay, good. So let's look at these in groups, and we'll come back to that one at the end. So I'll put those 6 aside. These are the detail brushes, okay? So we've got the detail brush, the insane detail brush, and the psycho brush. Now, I'm in two minds about these brushes, I'll be honest. I've always believed that a brush with a good enough tip doesn't really matter how large the tip is, as long as it's coming to a nice point. As you can see, these are coming out of the box, you know, without an obviously fine point, but they're dry, and you wouldn't necessarily expect them to have a fine point. Let's give them a bit of dampening and see how they measure up. So the detail brush is 6mm long and about 1mm, maybe 0.8mm at the base. The insane detail maybe 4.5mm at the tip, and about 1mm at the base again. And the psycho ,3mm and probably 0.5 millimeter at the base. The challenge with these 3 brushes is that when you're using detail brush, you want your paint to be quite smooth flowing, but if the paint comes more than halfway up the brush, then if it's quite watered down to flow smoothly, it's going to wick its way into the ferrule here, and then it'll dry and it will mess up the tip and the brush. And the less tip you've got, the easier it is for that paint to wick up. So you'd have to be super careful with these. And I'm in a way, I'm kind of not sure what they're for, because you know, something like the psycho here is so tiny. You'd say, well, it's for dotting eyes, but actually you can dot eyes with quite large brushes as long as they've got a nice fine tip. But here they are, the psycho, insane detail, and detail. You know, they're all coming to a decent tip with a little bit of dampening. They've got, in terms of control, the length of the tip means that you've got decent control over the brush. I guess the question in my mind is just whether you really need these brushes. We don't know. We'll look at the others. So put them to one side. And we'll look at the next 3. So here we've got character, regiment, and monster. And interestingly, the monster is a round grip rather than a triangular grip like the others. Hello. The character brush has a longer tip now, so we're looking at 7, 8, 8 and a bit mils there. So that's 8.5 mils long, 1.5 millimeters wide. And I like this brush because you can see from the ferrule that it actually swells ever so slightly and then comes back to the tip. And that's kind of what I look for, is that ever so gentle swelling out of the ferrule, because that says to me that it's going to hold paint, but it's not going to wick too quickly up into the ferrule. It's also got a good long length and a fine tip. Okay, all good signs that this is going to be a useful brush to use. But I'll leave that off. There we are. Okay, the next one is the regiment brush. Okay, and we see the same thing here. So we've got good length, 1.1, maybe 1.2 mil, 2 millimeters at the base. And again, you can see on this, as it comes out of the ferrule, this ever so gentle swelling of the brush head down to a fine tip. And again, that says to me that we're going to get good paint flow. We're not going to see too much wicking up into the ferrule as long as we look after this brush. So these two brushes so far I see as my go-to brushes. Let's look at the monster brush. Now this monster brush is actually a pretty good example of where I started painting in my hobby 35 years ago. This is probably, I would guess, size 3, size 4, something like that. I actually started painting with a size 5 and a size 7. And I was able to dot eyes back then. I wasn't much able to do much else, but I could dot eyes because, you know, it comes to a nice fine tip. So as long as you're careful with your control, you can get in there. But what you do lose with the length is a degree of control of that tip. It can get away from you. But if your hands are steady, it's fine. We're looking at 1.4, maybe 1.5 mil long, width of 2.5 to 3 millimeters. And as you can see, it's coming to a nice tip. There is a distinctive difference in color, you'll see, between the character and the regiment. They both come to quite a dark tip, from quite sort of chestnutty hairs. And in this case, we've got a sort of an orangey gold hair that doesn't really change color all that much at the tip. Now, I can't find any information immediately in this box as to what these brushes are made from, but I'm guessing that these two and the detail brushes are sable brushes, and that this one is probably a synthetic brush. It'll be interesting to see how that performs. So I'll put these three aside. So far, I'm liking these the best out of the brushes that I've seen. These are the ones that I think are going to be my go-to brushes. Okay, the last three. We've got the small and the large dry brush, that way around, and we've got the vehicle stroke terrain brush. So let's get the lids off these. So these, and exactly what it says on the tin. You know, we've got a angled square tip. That gives you both the ability to have wide dry brushing and controlled focused dry brushing when turning it around. Small and large, exactly the same. Again, from the feel of it, I'm guessing these are synthetic brushes. Not sure. Clearly a different color, different material to the tinier brushes, same as the monster brush. The angle is really helpful for control. We can see we've got a vehicle terrain brush here. Now I'm quite taken aback that I'm seeing this color. Don't know if you can see that on the camera, that this is not of an even color. If you compare this with the large dry brush, the large dry brush is an even orangey gold color. When we look at this, we've got pale at the tip, and then we've got these pale sections within the brush. Now, I don't know why this is the case, whether this is a mix of bristle and synthetic or bristle and something else, but maybe that's why we're seeing this distinction in color. I mean, this isn't a detailed brush. It's not one I'm going to get too worried about. As you can see, I've got a very similar one over here. This one's been through the wars. This is definitely a bristle brush. But, you know, it's a perfectly decent large area paintbrush, and that's what I'm expecting out of this. So no surprises from these three. They're about what you'd expect. I like the angular part of the dry brushes. I'm not going to use these for stippling like I did with this brush. You can see how the head has begun to splay. That's from being used as a stippling brush as well as a dry brush. These ones are strictly going to be dry brushes. That angle is important to keeping the control on the brush. Okay, so having seen all 9 of these brushes, let's come back and have a look at these 3. These are the 3 I said I liked the most, and then these 3 detail brushes. So we've got Psycho, Insane and Detail. And let's compare and contrast with the much vaunted Kolinsky Masterclass brush. So where does the Masterclass sit within this? Well, we can see immediately that we've got a longer tip, got 1.2 mils on the tip, around 1 mil wide at the base. So it's a longer tip than any of these 3. It's slightly finer than the character brush, but that's the one that it's closest to, so it's a little bit thinner. So what we're expecting from the Kolinsky brush is the same kind of control that I'm getting from the character brush, but with the detail and precision that I'm going to get from the detail brushes. That's what I'd be looking for from a high-end, high-quality brush, as this one purports to be. Of course, this whole set, as I said at the start, I got this whole set for £37. I think it's £40 RRP, something like that. One could reasonably ask whether it might be worth buying one of the more expensive sets, such as Artist Opus, or going for a cheaper set. And historically what I've tended to do is go for cheaper. And this is kind of my test run. So what I'm going to do now is I'm retiring these old brushes. All of my old brushes, they're being retired. I'm not throwing them away. I've already thrown away the ones that deserve to be thrown away. These are being retired. These are going to go into a box, and I'm going to decide whether they are coming back into service based on how these guys perform. So having done my box opening on these and shown you what's in the box and talked about what I think of what I'm finding here, the crucial question, of course, is how do these perform? And I'm not going to show you that today. What I'm going to do instead is I'm going to take these away for about a month, and I'm going to test drive them for a month on my miniatures, and I'll come back in a month and I'll show you some of the minis that I've painted with them, and I'll talk about my experience. So the big questions are the detail brushes worth it? Can you not get exactly the same level of control and flow without the risk of a damaged ferrule from using the longer brushes in the character and regiment range? And the other big question is, does this Kolinsky Sable Masterclass brush make a big difference compared to lesser Sable brushes and even what I think are synthetic brushes over here? So those are the questions I'm going to try and answer over the next month. So I hope you'll come back towards the end of September when I'm going to do another follow-up video to talk about how these brushes have performed in practice.